안녕하세요.
네, 문현님 안녕하세요.
아리조나 아줌마입니다. 지금
네,
여러 가지로 지금 성명을 발표한다고 해서 한번 했습니다.
Both in person and virtually all over the world. I am Michael Pack, the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which is the federal government entity that manages and oversees U.S. civilian international broadcasting. Now, unfortunately, as many of you abroad know all too well, there are regimes bent on preventing people from accessing objective news and information. To keep power, they manufacture and propagate false realities, seeking to control thought and belief and ultimately action. Let me be clear. This behavior is an affront to the universal right of freedom of expression, a right to which every single person is entitled by virtue of being a human being. America has never stood for this form of malevolence, and our nation must now confront it even more vigorously. Indeed, as the adversaries of liberty and democracy double down on producing and distributing disinformation, America must reassert itself in the new global war of ideas. To do that, we need to more robustly promote and explain our principles to the world. Fortunately, since 1942, we have had an excellent platform to do exactly that. That platform, of course, is Voice of America. Today, here at the headquarters of Voice of America in Washington, D.C., we are tremendously honored to host this very special event featuring the 70th U.S. Secretary of State, Michael R. Pompeo. To further introduce the Secretary, I'd like
여긴
to turn the
미국의
podium over to the
애리조나입니다.
Director
지금
of the Voice of
실시간 하는
America,
거를 제가
Robert R.
찍었습니다.
Riley.
지금 사회자가
Thank you, and
폼페오를
please
특정해서
enjoy the
얘기한다는
event.
얘기가 한다. 보이스 오브 아메리카 디렉터한테.
Thank you, Michael, and for your unstinting support. It's greatly appreciated. Welcome, everyone. I want to begin by thanking a few people who worked so hard to make this event a success. I begin with Eduardo
마이크인
Kaczkowski,
사람입니다.
who's the Director of Studio and Production Operations here at VOA, and his very hardworking team who, under the added difficulties of the COVID restrictions, worked so hard to get this job done. I want to thank John Lippman, the Deputy Programming Director, with his daily meetings for shepherding this all through and pulling it together, and most especially the Deputy VOA Director, Beth Robbins, for all the hard work she has done. Now it's a pleasure to introduce a man who needs no introduction. I think I can do it with two words. They are Renaissance man.
농담으로
Why? Well, briefly,
르네상스의 남자
at the U.S. Military
농담으로
Academy at
얘기하네요.
West Point, first in
소개하네요.
his class. A career Army officer, armor officer in West Germany, and in our cavalry unit, he helped protect Western Europe against what Ronald Reagan had called the evil empire. Now, Ronald Reagan was known for saying some other things. He was very fond of saying there's nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse. It's been a long time since we've had horse cavalry, but with a little twisted emphasis on what he said, I've heard that the Secretary is occasionally heard to say, life is always better in an M1 tank. Well, after his military career, Mr. Pompeo went on to Harvard Law School, where he excelled with the Harvard Law Review. After law school, he went to Kansas and began a successful business career. He founded Thayer Aerospace, where he served as CEO for more than a decade. He later became president of Century International. From thence, he ran for Congress successfully in the 4th District of Kansas. And even as a freshman congressman, he had an outsized influence due to the depth of his knowledge on foreign policy and intelligence issues and his powers of persuasion. He was in his fourth term when the president called upon him to take upon himself the role of the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And then in 2018, he was sworn in as the Secretary of State. Now, he's done all this while still being, at least from my perspective, still a young man. So we can expect much more from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I am so grateful for his honoring VOA with his presence today. Secretary Pompeo.
폼페이오에 대해서 여태까지 경력이나 이런 걸 하고 소개를 합니다. 이 사람들 농담도 잘하고요. 이럴 경우. 예, 그래서 굉장히 이런 부분 되게 좋습니다. 시리얼 타임인데도.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Michael, thanks for your leadership of this incredibly important institution. Bob, congratulations on returning to the helm of VOA. I am truly happy to be here. I'm honored to have been requested. And it's always fun to be with a fellow tanker, too. I want to acknowledge the other network chiefs who is with us today. Steve Yates of Radio Free Asia. Steve, where you at? Nice to see you. And a note of appreciation, too, to the Voice of American journalist staff and to all those watching and listening. I've sat down for interviews with many of you in the far corners of the world. They have always been a joy. And speaking of which, too, I understand that this speech is being broadcast on TV, radio, on your website, social media, in more than 40 languages. Hats off to the translators. I have no idea how anyone can translate my talking into Uzbek this quickly. That guy or gal deserves a bonus. It's great to have this opportunity. I've been following the work of Voice of America for decades. And as Bob just mentioned, I started my career as an Army officer, patrolling the Iron Curtain, Freedom's frontier. In the 1980s, I couldn't cross into East Germany. I was serving in a little town called Binlock. West Germans couldn't cross either. But your broadcast, Voice of America broadcast, could. Millions of men and women whose names we'll never know listen to you, often at their own peril. Their governments dealt only in lies and propaganda, but VOA's listeners wanted the truth, and that's what you gave them. VOA's very first broadcast in 1942 that Bob referred to began with the Battle Hymn of the Republic, along with this pledge, quote, "The news may be good, the news may be bad, but we'll tell you the truth." I love that. I always told my son,
자막 처리가 되는 방송인가 봐요. 나중에 제가 확인을 해보겠는데 저는 지금
he mostly followed my advice. And it has served him and
이런 게
many
처음이라서
of you I
일단은
know
그냥
well.
녹음을 하고
Your mandate
있습니다.
here at Voice of
제가
America
이런
is
유튜브나 이런 걸
unambiguous
한
to be
번도 안
accurate,
해봐서 이런
objective,
거는
and
이게 어떻게
comprehensive.
하는지 몰라서
And to
일단은
represent
이
America.
방송을 그대로 녹음해서
The mission of
올리겠습니다.
USAGM is to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy. That's because expanding freedom and democracy are what America has always been about. You're the voice of American exceptionalism. You should be proud of that. The world needs VOA's clarion call for freedom. Now more than ever, I hear it wherever I go. That's what I wanted to talk about today. I tell audiences about American exceptionalism wherever and whenever I can. Because it's true, because it's important. America is good and great. And everyone who truly grabs our founding understands this. Michael and Bob have made studying this history their life's work. Many of you have made it your life's mission too. That's why you work here at Voice of America. We were indeed the first nation founded on the central belief that all human beings are endowed with certain unalienable rights, and the governments are instituted to secure those God-given rights. We've always striven for a more perfect union. And goodness knows we don't always get it right. Therefore, we need both pride and humility about our past and our present. We need the truth. But it's very clear that when Americans have united around our founding values, be it in Philadelphia, at Gettysburg, at Seneca Falls, or during Martin Luther King's March on Washington, we've made good on our founding promise time and time again. Now, our adversaries try and claim otherwise. When the Chinese Communist Party attempted to exploit the tragic death of George Floyd to claim their authoritarian system was somehow superior to ours, I issued a statement which read in part, quote, during the best of times, the People's Republic of China ruthlessly imposes communism. But amid the most difficult challenge, the
중국에 대해서
United
얘기하고
States secures
있어요.
freedom. There
공산당에
is
대해서
no
얘기하고
moral
있습니다.
equivalence. This is a self-evident truth. It is not fake news for you to broadcast that this is the greatest nation in the history of the world and the greatest nation this civilization has ever known. Indeed, I'm not saying this to ignore our faults.
공산주의에
Just the
대해서
opposite. It is
자유가
to acknowledge
없는
them.
것에 대해서 얘기하고 있는
But
것
this
같아요.
isn't the vice of America, focusing on everything that's wrong with our great nation. It's the voice of America. It certainly isn't the place to give authoritarian regimes in Beijing or Tehran a platform. Your mission is to promote democracy, freedom, and American values all across the world.
미국은 자유를
U.S. taxpayer-funded institution aimed squarely at that. Indeed, this is what sets VOA apart
자유와
from
민주주의가
MSNBC and Fox News and the like.
미국이라는 곳이라는
You
것이라는
can
것을
give voice to
얘기하고
the voiceless in
있습니다.
dark corners of the world. You're
그것이
the voice
중요하다고.
of American striving. You're the voice of American exceptionalism. You are indeed the tip of freedom's spear. Now look, like many government agencies after the Cold War
Voice
ended,
of
our international
America,
broadcasters,
this channel.
well, they
그래서
lost
그래서
their
좋다는
way.
얘기를 하고 있고요.
Many of you know
지금
this.
Voice of
And there
America를
were, I'm
해야
sure,
된다는
many
얘기를 하고
reasons. The
있어요.
Soviet Union had collapsed, the wall had come down, names like Bin Laden and Zarqawi and Baghdadi weren't widely known. In fact, many wrote that history was over. We allowed security protocols to lapse, and VA lost its commitment to its founding mission. Its broadcasts had become less about telling the truth about America and too often about demeaning America. In 2013, one of my predecessors described the Broadcasting Board of Governors as, quote, practically defunct, end of quote. Look, that's in part why Congress created the role of
여러가지
CEO
언론들에
of
대해서 얘기를 하고
USAGM
있습니다.
on a bipartisan basis. And it is again why I'm here today.
제대로 언론들이 정직하게 전하지 않아서 그거에 대해서 얘기하고 있습니다.
They didn't want the voice of American diplomacy to be broadcast on the Voice of America.
더 나빠지고 있고 미국에 대해서 나쁘게
Just a moment.
지는 걸로 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
We're all part of institutions with duties and responsibilities higher and bigger and more important than any one of us individually. But this kind of censorial instinct is dangerous. It's morally wrong. Indeed, it's against your statutory mandate here at VOA. Censorship, wokeness,
위험하고
political correctness, it all
잘못된
points in one
거라고
direction.
지금 일어나는 일들이
Authoritarianism
대해서
cloaked
얘기를 하고
as moral
있습니다.
righteousness.
저도
Similar to what we're seeing at Twitter and Facebook and Apple and on too many university campuses today. It's not who we are. It's not who we are as Americans. And it's not what Voice of America should be. It's time that we simply put wokeism to sleep. And you can lead the way. You all know. That's why you came here. There's a new dawn here at Voice of America. The American public doesn't know this, but when Michael took office, some 1,500 employees, almost 40% of the workforce, had been improperly vetted, including many with high-level security clearances. VOA was rubber stamping J-1 visas for foreign nationals, including some from communist China. We shouldn't be doing that. We have plenty of Mandarin language speakers here in America, and we are building, growing, teaching, educating more. Committed patriots, some of Chinese American descent who are amazing people. The Trump administration team is working to fix these national security threats. We want to vet employees properly. We want to reorient VOA to its mission of truth and unbiased reporting. We want to depoliticize what takes
국가
place here.
보안에
It's too
대한
important for the
거를
American
고치려고
people and for the
트럼프는
world.
항상 노력했고
Returning this organization to its charter and its charge to spread the message of freedom,
미국과
democracy, and American exceptionalism.
미국과 세계적으로 평화를 위해서 굉장히 중요하기 때문이라고 생각합니다.
These institutions, we're trying to take politics out. That's a pretty good feature story for whoever wants to write it up. As Secretary of State, I'm telling you all of this because I want the best for the people here and for this organization because you are vital to helping America shine light into the darkest places with the power that only America can muster. Governments like those in China, Iran, North Korea, they don't have the respect for the universal dignity of every human being in the way that America does. Indeed, that is what America was founded upon. Those regimes are anathema to everything that our nation stands
이란,
for.
북한, 중국은 인권이 없는
We know
나라라는
that
걸
government
얘기하고
exists to
있어요.
serve people. They believe that people exist to serve government. And VOA's work is vital. As I said before, you're the tip of freedom's spirit. Every week, 278 million people listen to VOA in 47 languages. There are Iranians who are listening to you, wondering if they'll ever be able to shed their Islamic shackles. There are Moldovans and Ukrainians who want truthful reporting, not Russian disinformation and propaganda. There are Chinese citizens who are tired of a regime that's done nothing but brutalize them since 1949. There are Venezuelans who want to know the truth of the Maduro regime's corruption. There are oppressed people all over the globe who still turn to America for hope. Now, I know many of you, especially those of you overseas, continue and have done heroic work. Thank you. I want to commend VOA's Hong Kong reporting team, which faced political intimidation, harassment, and attacks, but still got the job done. My highest praise.
VOA 방송을 중국인들이나 이런 사람들이 많이 보고 있습니다. 굉장히 많은 숫자가. 그거는 미국을 따라하기를 원합니다. 너무나도 중국에 지쳐있기 때문에.
I also want to pay tribute to members of the other radio services who are here and listening. The only Uyghur language news service in the world is run by RFA. You've told everyone who will listen, indeed some who didn't want to, the truth about the CCP's atrocities against its own people in Xinjiang, the stain of the century. And you've done so despite the fact that the CCP has jailed the relatives of at least 6 RFA journalists in Xinjiang's internment camps and continues to threaten you and your families simply for doing your jobs. Your work takes courage. Please keep telling everyone who will listen what's happening in the toughest parts of the world. The world expects it, and America will be better off for it. I want to leave you with a quote that conveys why the VOA's mission is so critical before I take some questions from Bob. This quote's from a ways back. It's from George Washington. He said, quote, "Truth will ultimately prevail where there is pains to bring it to light," end of quote. When America brings truth to the world, we bring light. Don't forget that. It's what you do. May God bless you. May God bless the voice of America. And God bless these United States. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Some of the questions I have for you were fielded from our division directors who wanted to also have their input to get you to answer some of these. But let me begin with this one.
VOA 방송이 중요함을 얘기하고요. 질문을 받습니다.
We can afford to tell the full truth about America and the amplitude of American life and all of its facets. In your many travels in your recent years,
VOA는 상업적인 방송이 아니다.
judge as those parts of America that are least known by foreign audiences that we need to tell them about?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. If I have a chance in a moment where we are away from the formal business of the day, I'll often ask ambassadors or foreign ministers, when were you last in the States? What'd you do? Where'd you go see? The answer is almost always, I went to New York, I went to Washington, I went to San Francisco, or I went to Los Angeles. The adventuresome may have traveled all the way to Boston. Boy, that's not representative of all of who America is. I'm from Kansas. It's a different place in so many ways. It's engaged in different businesses. Its government is different. Its people think about the world in a different way. These stories from places other than the coasts are important, and that extends to rural parts of South Carolina, to Appalachia, to folks who live up in Minnesota and along our northern border along Canada. There are so many different facets of the United States that I think if you asked people around the world, they would only know this place we are here in Washington, or maybe our financial center in New York. I hope that you all get a chance to tell those other stories. And I'd add one last piece. It's not just geographic. It's not just where it is. You could find right here in Washington dozens and dozens of different stories about different pieces of the things, the institutions that make America so unique, so special. These things that our founders called the small platoons, our civic organizations, right? How many of you are members of the PTA, trying to help your kids' school be just a little bit better? How many of you participate in a church group on Wednesday evenings where you have your chili feed or you just gather? Those are important parts of American life that have made us so unique and so special. And I want people all across the world to see those
미국
things
사람들
because those institutions form
외국인들한테 뭘
bedrock
알리냐?
of our nation and they can help their countries too.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You've made some very eloquent speeches about the relationship between American founding principles and U.S. foreign policy. How would you prioritize those fundamental rights, some of which you referred to in your remarks, when you, with the limited time with foreign heads of state, want to have a clear message? You've been very forthright on freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of... How do you prioritize those, or is the prioritization custom made for the country you're addressing?
Bob, it certainly does vary by where you are in the situation that you find that government, and frankly, the traditions of that country. The Unalienable Rights Commission, led by Professor Marion Glendon and Peter Berkowitz at the State Department, it's a great report. It's 50 pages. I'd urge you to go read it. You'll agree with some of it, some you may not. But what it tried to do was to take this human rights project from the 20th century that has just fallen away. It lost its capacity to understand the things that were contained in our founding about how human rights are formed. It moved away even from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what I wanted to do in that was to reground American foreign policy and how we thought about human rights. And I think the report captures it pretty well. Your point about religious freedom and the capacity to speak freely, two core rights that if a nation gets it wrong, it will be less secure, it will be less prosperous, its people will be less whole. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about those issues around the world. We've made progress in certain places, other places we've not, but it's important that American leaders, not only the Secretary of State, but all of us, acknowledge those shortcomings when we speak with foreign leaders.
경제적으로 언론은 저희가 중요하다고
Get
얘기를
them
하고
headed in a better
있어요.
direction for their people. I'm proud of the work we've done in this regard. These principles matter. Their execution
나라가
and
이것을
implementation is complex
잃어버리면
because
모든
foreign
것을 다
policy always
잃어버린다는
is. There
얘기를
are
하고
competing
있습니다.
priorities. But America can never walk away from those central principles and understandings. And we know the difference between rights-respecting countries and those that aren't. And we have an obligation to call each of them precisely what they are.
Now, as you all know, we're at the cusp of a change in administrations. On certain foreign policy issues, there seems to have formed a bipartisan consensus. For instance, perhaps China, on both sides of the aisle, is seen as the principal challenge to the United States today. Are there others? North Korea, Venezuela, Iran? On which of these do you expect some continuity with the new administration, and where do you perhaps see what may come as the biggest changes?
Look, it's an important question. Leaders always want to understand that when you make a commitment to them that it will survive. We have elections every 2 years here, federal elections. We have presidential elections every 4 years.
많은 사람들이 차이나를 굉장히 위협하는 나라라고
President Trump
생각하는데
rightly identified this when
북한에
he
대해서
started
어떻게
campaigning back in
생각하는지를
2015 as the
물어보고
singular
있어요.
threat to the centrality of Western thought in the world, the idea that we're going to have a rules-based system that respected property rights and human dignity. China is singular in the threat it poses to those things. And I do think there's a consensus there. I've worked with Democrats on many important issues, on issues of Hong Kong and issues that I referred to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and the
많은
atrocities taking place there.
미국 안에
So I do hope that stays the same. I hope too, even in the Middle East, even where the previous administration had a different
사실이라고 얘기하고 있어요.
approach with respect to the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's not 2015. What has taken place in the Middle East in these last 4 years, whether that's the efforts we have put to constrain the theocracy, the kleptocrats in charge in Iran, the work we have done with the Abraham Accords, the work that we've done to recognize the fundamental understandings of Israel as a nation that has a right to exist, and its capital is in Jerusalem. It is the home of the Jewish people there. And those are things that I believe will be lasting, because I think the people of those nations want them to last, and I hope that the next administration will continue to build on them in a way that continues to build out peace and prosperity among all the nations in the Middle East. I'm hopeful that that will take place.
I noticed over the weekend you signed a joint declaration with 4 other foreign ministers, Australia, UK, New Zealand, regarding the recent arrests in Hong Kong. You also removed the restraints on high-level diplomatic contacts between the United States and Taiwan, and apparently the U.S. ambassador to the UN will be in Taiwan soon. What do you expect to accomplish with this flurry?
Well, flurry, I find funny.
I should have chosen another
Yes,
word.
but no, I get it. Look, I wish these things had been done a long time ago. These weren't rushed. These were considered efforts that we made, and they're an important part of the strategy that we've laid out with respect to how to protect and preserve American freedoms vis the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presents. Look, one of the core problems, I gave some remarks where I talked about China and said, no matter what it is they say, we must distrust and verify. And you referred to the arrest of these some 50 people in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party made a promise to the people of Hong Kong, and they walked away from it. The Chinese Communist Party has a commitment, a set of understandings we have with respect to Taiwan. We need to hold the parties accountable to those commitments as well. The Chinese Communist Party promised President Obama they wouldn't harm the islands in the South China Sea, and they turned around and did it, and there was almost no cost imposed. We have attempted to deliver a clear understanding of the requirements that we have for the Chinese Communist Party and how it should behave, that aren't frankly very different from what we expect of any nation with respect to how they interact with the United States. And we do that because we have a responsibility to preserve and protect security and prosperity for the American people. Our policy with respect to the Chinese Communist Party has furthered that, and this will be a long challenge. The Chinese Communist Party has a clear intent for hegemonic dominance, and we have an obligation or responsibility to the American people and frankly to
우리는 미국을 우선적으로 지켜야 의무가 있습니다. 여러 가지에서.
make sure that that is not the world that our children and grandchildren live in.
It's interesting in meeting with the division directors of Voice of America, how frequently in those meetings the name of China comes up. When I ask them what's on the horizon, what are you noticing, it's China.
자유를 사랑하는
America,
사람들에게
China,
또 전하고
East
싶다고
Africa,
여기에서
China.
얘기를
And it's
하네요.
not simply the Belt and Road Initiative, it's their information strategy. How they get affiliates in those regions of the world, how they feed them free stuff, and they're, as you know, a whole of government approach. Now, the United States isn't a whole of government, but Voice of America is here to do our part through our bureaus and through our reporting. What do you think we can do better to help highlight the dangers these things represent when seen together rather than as a separate series of approaches?
But this challenge is in fact comprehensive. Our administration began by working on the economic side of this. The president placed tariffs
저희
on Chinese
채널은
goods, trying to
이런
stop
중요한
intellectual property,
내용을
denying
전하려고
tens of millions of jobs in the United States of America because they would steal our information, take it back to China, build it, and then dump it here in the United States. It's information. You talked about that. This is ongoing.
트럼프가 경제적인 제재를 가해서 중국이 스스로 하기를
Find out where
했는데
this all began, but it took months and months of effort to do that. We are now more than a year on. We still don't have access to important information about how the virus began. It's important for health and safety and to make sure that something like this doesn't come out of China again. Your team can report these facts. Your point about being a global
코로나로
phenomenon.
CCP,
I have a
코로나로
bureau. I have
바이러스로
a China desk. I
1년
have an
넘게
East Asia
이렇게
Pacific bureau. We have
이런
an
상황이
Indo-Pacific
전개되고
strategy.
있는 것을
But
만들고
every one of
있습니다.
my ambassadors and chiefs of mission understands that China presents a challenge in their country, wherever they may be, in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia for sure. And our team on the ground is working to protect American security from the Chinese Communist Party in the country
국민이
that they
우리를
have been
할 때
assigned
항상
to.
문제점은
Hope your reporters, no matter where
중국의
they
그런
find themselves, they're
문제점이었다고
in South
얘기를 하고
Africa
있어요.
or in Morocco or wherever they are, observes the activities of the Chinese Communist Party inside of their country and how it impacts the people of those countries as well.
If I may ask a last question, this one more related to Russia. The United States seems to be shrinking its footprint in Africa, so is France. Russia is increasing its. Is this the result of a judgment on the part of the United States that disorder on the African continent is less of a problem or less of a threat to our interests, or how would you?
So the forces, the disposition that the DoD has made has really been about the counterterrorism fight more broadly. How is it that we allocate U.S. resources to keep the homeland safe? So the decisions the president has made with respect to Afghanistan and the Middle East broadly, Syria, you talk about North Africa as well, has been to allocate the capacity of the United States to preserve and protect the homeland. I'm always mindful, and it's easy to write about, if you just focus on troop numbers alone, if you say the United States used to have 1,000 people, now they only have 800, or they used to have 800, they only have 400, you may well be missing America's capacity to preserve and protect itself. I was the director of the CIA. I know the other tools and capabilities that we can bring. They are unseen. They don't get reported from the podium at the Department of Defense. But the American people should know. President Trump has been
미국을 보호하기 위해서 여러 가지
about
작전을
getting it
했다는
right,
얘기를 하고
making sure we
있는
put
거예요.
fewer of our young men and women in harm's way, but never giving up the responsibility we have to ensure that terrorism, or at least the risk that a terror act takes place and hurts Americans, whether they're here in the United States or elsewhere in the world as well.
Great. Mr. Secretary, I can't thank you enough for gracing us with your presence today. It was very kind of you to make the trip, and it's deeply appreciated by me and by everyone else here. Please join me in a
Thank
round
you.
of
It's a pleasure.
applause.
Thank you.
That's the